We are finishing up this series today that we're on margin, talking about making room for what matters most. I'm going to be out of town next week. My family's heading out tomorrow morning to visit family in North Carolina, so Lex will be here teaching. You don't want to miss that. If you're in town, if you're away, catch it online. He always does a great job. But we're wrapping up this series, and just a refresher, here's how we're defining margin for this series. When it comes to our time, our schedule, our money, our relationships, all of that stuff, that margin is the space between our current pace and our limits, okay? Margin is the space between our current pace. Our current pace is how much money we're spending, how busy our schedules are, how many relationships we're in the middle of, and all of that. It's the space between that and our limits, because we said we all have limits in all of those areas. And if we're honest, too many of us don't have enough space between our pace and our limits, do we? Too many of us are living without margin, and our schedules and our finances and consequently our relationships are all at their limits. So today, I want us to look at this idea of why it's so important to create margin relationally. Why it's so important that we have that. Because here's the problem. The problem is in our effort to get the most out of life, and I think we all want the most out of life, but we continue to squeeze in one more thing after another, and eventually in trying to squeeze in one more thing, we end up reaching a breaking point in somewhere in our lives. Now, some of you know what I'm talking about because some of you have actually reached a breaking point and some things fell apart for you, right? Maybe you went home and you just saw that one more email sitting in your inbox, and it was just one email after a series of emails with that same person, and you just found yourself in a puddle, right? You just broke down, and somebody walked in and they said, "What's wrong, Dad? What's wrong, Mom?" And you were like, "I don't know. It was just one more thing, right?" And it was just the last straw for you. And for some of you, you've had a financial meltdown. I mean, it was that unexpected thing. It was that bump in the road financially that you didn't see coming. It was that last envelope that came in the mail, and suddenly there was a breaking point for you. And in an effort to try and cram in one more thing in the schedule, one more thing emotionally, one more thing financially, eventually there was a meltdown and you hit a breaking point. And some of you, maybe you're on the verge of that right now. Maybe you're on the verge of that, maybe in a relationship, maybe in your marriage, maybe in your relationship with your kids or with a significant other. Some of you, maybe you're on the verge of that in your careers where you're just about to hit that breaking point because it's just way too much. And the thing about relationships is this, that relationships thrive when there's margin, but relationships die when we live at our limits, when we're constantly at our limits. And so I want us to talk about our relationships. I want to give you kind of this picture of what it looks like when we don't have margin in our critical relationships, the relationships that matter most to us. And when we live our lives without margin, what we end up doing is we end up giving our wife or our husband, our significant other, our kids, whoever it is, we end up pushing on them responsibilities that they are not equipped for and that they were never intended to have or to handle. And when we do this, it's kind of like handing them a weight. So just picture that weight in your mind. We hand them that weight, and it's like, honey, I've got a lot of trips coming up over the next few weeks and months. I'm going to be traveling more than normal, and I'm going to be gone a lot, and I need you to carry a responsibility. And I need you to carry a responsibility that I know belongs to me, but I need you to hold this for a little while I go and I do something else somewhere else. And we all know in life that there are times and there are days, there are weeks, sometimes there's even seasons in our lives where we just have to do that, where we just have to say to our kids, Mom's going to be gone, or Dad's going to have to work a little bit harder, or I'm going to miss a weekend or two, or I'm going to have to miss that ball game or that recital along the way. But sometimes we hand our spouse or we hand our kids this weight. And this weight, it just represents a responsibility that we should be carrying, but we're expecting them to carry instead. And you know what happens when we hand that weight to them? They always accept it. They always take it from us. And because, I mean, they're like, I want to be a good husband while you work. I want to be a good wife while you travel. I want to be a good son. I want to be a good daughter, all of that. And I know mom works hard, and I know dad works hard. I know you're going to miss that ball game. I know you're going to miss my recital. I know you're going to miss that birthday, but that's okay. I can carry that weight. I can carry that weight. And yeah, I'm going to miss you, and I wish you were here, but it's all right because I can carry the weight. And so they do. They carry that weight for us. But here's where the problem comes. The problem comes when we leave them with that weight and we never come back and take it back. We never come back and take it out of their hands. And then time goes by, and time goes by, and time goes by, and they begin to slowly wear out. And there's tension, and there's problem, and there's stuff going on, and we don't completely understand what it is. And here's how you know that you've handed that weight off to somebody in your family and you haven't come back to get it. A couple of things. One is when you're constantly repeating promises to do better. When you're constantly repeating promises to do better. Dad's going to do better. Mom's going to do better. I know you're right. I need to cut back. I need to do less. I need to say no more. I know I'm going to do better. I promise. And they're upset, and you're upset, and you're wrong, and you come in late again, you've overscheduled again, and you promise, but nothing changes. And you know how we justify this when we do this? And when we justify this is, every now and then we'll show up and we'll say, honey, how's that weight going? How are you holding on to that weight? You doing okay with that weight, right? I know I left that weight with you, but are you doing okay with that? And we cheer them on, and here's some flowers, right? Or I bought you a box of golf balls. How are you handling holding that weight for me, right? And we cheer them on, and then we go back to whatever we were doing, wherever that was. And the other way you've handed this off to them is you're chronically absent for important events. You're chronically absent for important events. You miss another game, you miss another recital, you miss another birthday, you miss this or you miss that. Oh no, I'm going to be gone over our anniversary again, right? And then the third way is you just keep pointing to the future to make up for the past. It's going to get better. Next year, next summer, next Christmas, next birthday, next time. I know I missed this time, but next time. When it's chronic and when it's repeated and when it just doesn't seem to change and you're having the same conversation about the same thing over and over and over, you have handed someone in your family a burden that they were not meant to carry and they cannot carry for very long. And then eventually their mental willingness to carry your weight, it's generally overcome by emotional and sometimes physical exhaustion. And so they drop the weight. And it's so interesting when the weight drops in families. For men, we've kind of look at the immediate event, right? And we're like, what happened? I don't understand. I don't get it. What happened? It's like, all I said was, honey, how was your day? And she broke into a puddle of tears and just ran out of the room, and I don't know what happened, right? That's the way we guys handle it, Or, all I said was, I'm going to be 5 minutes late getting home from work tonight, and when I got home, she wasn't there, and I haven't seen her for 3 days. I don't know what happened. And we don't know, we don't understand it, and this was just one more thing that just kind of came crashing down from the weight of it all. When the weight drops, sometimes the grades plummet. When the weight drops, intimacy evaporates in relationships. When the weight drops, you tell your husband or you tell your wife, look, I've got another trip, and this one took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting this one at all. And instead of seeing disappointment in their eyes, you almost think you read, good. I'm glad you're leaving again because it's just better when you're not here. Now, if you haven't been there, someday you might be there. And there's nothing worse in a family than when the weight drops. Because, and I hate to tell you this, because sometimes when the weight drops, there is irreparable damage. And sometimes it signals the end of a relationship. And sometimes, even though a lot of the pieces can be put back together, not all of them quite go back together the way they were before. And sometimes it takes seasons, and sometimes it takes even years to bring about the trust that was lost when you asked someone to carry a weight that you were intended to carry, but you had something else to do, and so you left it with them just a little bit too long. Now, I understand why this happens. And part of the reason that we do this, part of the reasons this happened is because we love progress, right? I mean, we're just kind of wired as humans for progress. And in the marketplace and in the places where you work and where I work, I mean, we love progress. And when I go to work, I can measure my progress, right? I can measure how I'm doing, and you probably can too. But when I come home, I can't really measure progress there. I mean, there's no progress. I'm just home, right? So what we do is, what do we do with this? And how do we live with this tension of progress at work and moving forward and all that, but also having healthy marriages and healthy relationships with our kids and with the people that matter most? Well, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul gives us some really great instructions. And here's the instructions that Paul gives us. It's in Ephesians chapter 5. And he says this. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And this is the introduction. This is Paul's introduction to something that he's about to say to me as a husband. Okay? He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And submit means this. It means I place myself under. That's what submit means, to place myself under. Or I'm going to put you above me. Or better put is this way. I'm going to put your needs above my needs. That's what it means to submit. And here's the deal. I have never been called to submit myself to a career, even though my career is in the local church. And there's the tension, isn't it? I've never been asked to submit myself to my desire to create a name for myself. I've never been asked to submit myself to the drive to make a lot of money or to climb to the top of the company ladder or anything like that. But my Heavenly Father, through the New Testament, specifically through the Apostle Paul, has said, I am to submit myself to a person. And Paul goes right to the heart of this. He says, husbands, he says, here's what it looks like to submit yourself to one another and to your wife. He says, you are to love your wives just as Christ loved the church. And then in case we didn't know exactly what he was talking about there, he says this, and gave himself up for her. Husbands, love your wives. How? As Christ loved the church. Not as you think she deserves to be loved. Husbands, you are to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And how do we do that? We do it by following Christ's example, and you give yourself up for her. You give up your ambition for her. You give up some of your desire for progress and all those good things that God put in your heart to do for the sake of her. Now, let me tell you what the obstacle to this is. That when we decide that we're going to submit to others out of reverence for God, here's what the obstacle is for most of us here. The obstacle is for most of us is fear. It's fear. We talked about this on the first week of this series. It's fear. You know, we think, you know, but what if I don't measure up? You know, or I'm afraid, what if I fall behind? Or what if I don't show up for that? I mean, what will people think? Or I'm afraid of how people might interpret that, or if I move out of that, or if I say no to that, you know, how's that going to come across? And I'm afraid. And none of us really want to admit it, but it's really being afraid. It's fear that drives the margin right out of our lives, and it's fear. Now, let me give you a little bit of wisdom. And this was wisdom that another pastor gave me several years ago, and I am so thankful for this wisdom. It's one of the reasons that I insist on teaching on this subject so often in our church. This wisdom, it just changed my perspective on all this and how I view all of this stuff. But here's what this pastor said. He said, you're married, right? He said, you're married and you're a parent. And he said, you're a husband and you're a father. And he said, those are the only two unique things that you have to do. Those are the only two unique roles that you have. And I thought about that, and he was right. I mean, for my whole life, for the rest of my life, no matter how long I live, I only have a couple of unique roles. One is first husband to Marcia, and second is the biological father of my kids, right? That's it. And anything else I do, someone else can do, and at some point, someone else will do. And there will be somebody else doing this right here someday, because I won't be here to do it. I'll be somewhere else. Pastoring this church and doing this job is not unique to me. People did it before me. People will do it after me. And one day, somebody will be doing your job, right? They will be running your company. They'll be running your department because you won't be around to do it. Some of you, you're here and you're retired, right? Somebody is sitting in your office, in your desk, doing the job that you used to do before you retired. And my only two unique roles in life is first husband to Marcia, hopefully only. She can always get a second, but she can't get another first, right? So there's that. And father to my kids. I will always be their father. And here's what that pastor asked that just really changed my perspective on all of this. He said, why in the world would you trade what is unique to you for something that someone else can and one day will do? He said, that's a bad trade. And you know what? In 30 years of doing this, I've seen it all. I tell our staff all the time, I'm never surprised by anything. In 30 years, I think I've seen everything. And I've seen too many families where the relationships just imploded because they were living at the limits. And I've seen too many father-son, father-daughter relationships that have collapsed. And I've talked to too many couples that were trying to put things back together, and for some of them, it was just way too late. And because remember, your time is limited. We talked about that. Your time is limited, and once it's gone, you can't get it back. I mean, so you only get to do this once, which means your kids, they're only toddlers once, and if you miss it, you miss it, and you only get to to watch them play that first season once. There's only one first driving experience for your 15-year-old, and then you never get to do that again. There's only one 16th birthday, and then it's gone, and you don't get to redo any of that. So why in the world would you trade what you have that is unique to you for something that someone else can and one day will do? And when I heard that, I mean, and it dawned on me, and I thought, there is no way in the world that I'm going to miss that. There's no way that I'm going to miss that. And I don't care where we have to live. I don't care what we have to drive. I don't care how big or small the church gets. There's no way that I want to miss that. So here's what I would say to you, and we'll be done with this series. Don't trade. Don't trade what's unique to you for something that someone else will do. Don't trade what's unique to you for something that someone one day will do. Great relationships, they thrive where there's space between your pace and your limit, between your performance and your limits. And here's the thing that you need to understand. You will never be happier than your relationships. No matter how much money you have, no matter where you live, no matter what your title is or your status is, no matter who knows your name, you will never be happier than your relationships and your relationships with the people closest to you. And you will never be happier than the relationships you have with the people who are most precious to you. So why in the world would you trade what is unique to you for something that someone else eventually is going to do? Life is better with margin. Relationships are healthier with margin. So if you don't have margin in one of these areas in your life, do whatever you have to do to get some. And if you're married, or one day if you hope to be married or get married, I hope you have the kind of marriage where you can look back and you can say, we lived happily ever after because we did what we needed to do to get it right the first time. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, every one of us, we have a pace in life, and some of our paces are pretty fast and pretty moving. And we also all have limits. And if a lot of us are being honest, God, in some of the areas of our life, whether it's our schedule, our relationships, our finances, that space between those two things is pretty narrow. And in some cases, we can't even see it. So God, I pray that we would just take some steps this week and in the weeks to come just to reflect on how we're living in each of these areas of our lives. And do we have the margin that we need? Do we have the margin that we need to have a healthy financial life? Do we have the margin we need to have healthy relationships? And if not, I pray that we would have the courage to take some steps to get some margin. God, help us to take these words from Paul. Help us to submit to one another. Help us to place ourselves under the people who matter most to us and submit to them and to give them what they need so that our relationships can be the healthiest. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.